Hi, Algebra 2. This is Unit 10, Lesson 12. And today we're going to talk about solving rational equations. So a rational equation is an equation containing at least one fraction whose numerator and denominator are polynomials. So there's two different ways we can solve fractional equations. The first one, the method 1, is just if I have two equal fractions. That's basically just a proportion, so I'm just going to be able to cross multiply, solve, and then you do have to check for rejects, because remember, a denominator of a fraction is not allowed to equal 0, so if the answer you get happens to make that denominator 0, then you have to reject it. Method 2 is if I have the sum or difference of fractions, you have to factor the denominators and find the LCD, least common denominator. Then you multiply each term by that LCD. That gets rid of the denominators because they'll cancel out. And then you solve, and then once again you have to check for any rejects. All right, so let's look at the first case where I just have a fraction equal to a fraction and I'm going to cross multiply. Just remember though that when you are cross multiplying, you're multiplying that 2 by the whole term, that whole numerator, x minus 1, and the 5 gets multiplied by the 4x plus 5. So not that you need to do this each time, but I'm doing it so you remember that 2 is actually distributed to everything in there, giving you 2x minus 2, and the 5 is distributed to all of that, giving you 20x plus 25. And now this is just a linear equation that you probably learned how to solve back in middle school. All right, so this one was definitely not too easy, not too hard. You're just cross multiplying and solving. All right, so that gives me negative 27, and that doesn't go in evenly, but that's okay. I can just reduce that. So 27 and 18 are both divisible by 9, and that gives me negative 3/2. Now just quickly check. If I was to plug in, well, actually, I don't have to check because I don't have any x's in the denominator. If you have an x in the denominator, like you're going to see for B, you have to check your answer to make sure that there's no problem with it. Now, this one is a little bit harder when I'm cross multiplying. X plus 1 times x minus 6, that's one side, and 2 times 2 minus x is the other side. All right, so now I'm actually foiling this. X times x is x squared. X times 6 is negative 6x, 1 times x is 1x, 1 times negative 6 is negative 6. Distributing 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times negative x is negative 2x. Now I'm going to combine these like terms, and that's going to give me negative 5x minus 6. And this is a quadratic, so everything needs to come to the same side, so I'm going to add 2x. Bring that over to the left, and I'm going to subtract 4. So this way I have a 0 on that side. So I'm really going to have x squared minus 3x minus 10 equals 0. Whew. And now I got a factor to solve. So my factors of 10 that also combine to 3 are negative 5 and positive 2. And then I set each factor equal to 0. All that does is change the sign. Okay, and then I just have to quickly make sure when I plug in those numbers, it does not give me a 0 in the denominator because that's not allowed. So just quickly plug in 5. Nope, that's good. 5 is good for both sides, and negative 2. 2 minus negative 2 is positive 4, and negative 2 minus 6 is negative 8. As long as those solutions are not giving you 0 in the denominator, then you are all good. All right, 2 is going to be method 2, and it's going to take us through the steps. Consider the equation 1 over 2 minus 9 over 4x equals 3 over 4x. What's the least common denominator for all three fractions? So you have to consider the number, and you have to consider the letter. My least common denominator is 4x. So then what you're doing is, I'm going to rewrite it down here. You have to multiply everything by the least common denominator because basically that will clear the fractions. It will get rid of those denominators. So everything gets multiplied by 4x, every single term. Because what happens is it clears the fractions. 2 goes into 4x 2x times. And then all I do is multiply what's left. 2x times 1 is 2x. 4x and 4x cancel, so I just have the negative 9. 4x and 4x cancel, and I just have the 3. So by multiplying everything by the least common denominator, it clears the equation of all the denominators, and you just have a linear equation that now you can solve. So that's the main idea of what we are doing here. All right, and then once again, you do have to check, make sure when you plug in that 6 that nothing is happening to, that you don't have 0 in the denominator. So that's the idea of what we're going to do, but of course we're going to try some harder ones on the next page. All right, which of the following values of x solves that equation? Now this one, since it's multiple choice, you actually technically can test out the choices. Now you know how to do that, but let's practice our new method. So I need my least common denominator. So my least common denominator of 6, 10, and 15 is 30. Everything's multiplied by 30. Everything. Every single term. Because 6 goes into 30 5 times. So you've cleared that denominator, and now what's left gets multiplied. 5 times x is 5x. 5 times negative 4 is negative 20. 10 goes into 30 3 times. So you're left with 3. That 3 needs to be multiplied by the x and by the negative 2. And then 15 goes into 30 twice, and 31 times 2 is 62. I'm going to combine my like terms that are on the left, and I just have a linear equation, so now I'm just solving that. All right, so that's what we're doing on all of these. Divide by 8, and x equals 11. All right, I had to rewrite some of these because they came out a little blurry for some reason. So let's look at, and I'm just going to pick, now it's definitely going to get a little bit harder because your least common denominator is going to be a little bit harder to see. So your least common denominator, when I'm looking at A, I have n minus 7, 2, and n minus 7, is going to be a combination of the 2 and the n minus 7. And so basically every single term is going to be multiplied by 2 and n minus 7. Now I'm not really doing that because I'm going to cancel out first a lot. So the first fraction, the n minus 7 and the n minus 7 cancel, and I'm just left with the 2. Well, 2 times 2n is 4n. 2 times negative 9 is negative 18. The second fraction, the 2 cancels with the 2, but I am still left with n minus 7, and I'm multiplying that by n. Remember, you're distributing, so n times n is n squared, and n times negative 7 is negative 7n. And the last term, n minus 7, cancels with the n minus 7, and 5 times 2 is 10. All right? Now, I do have a quadratic because I have an n squared. So I have n squared. I'm going to write it in standard form, which means the n squared comes first. 4n minus 7n is negative 3n. And I have negative 18. And I'm going to bring the 10 over to the other side. I could have done that all at once, but I didn't want anybody to get lost along the way, so I subtract 10. Because the only way to solve a quadratic is to factor it. Okay, so I'm looking for the factors of 28 that combine together to give me 3. And that's going to be a negative 7 and a positive 4. So negative 7 times 4 is negative 28. And when I multiply, it gives me a negative 3. Each factor gets set equal to 0. So all that does is change the signs. Now we have to quickly check if I was to plug in 7 to each fraction, would that result in the denominator being 0? And it actually does. So this is not a solution. Because if I was to plug it in, 7 minus 7 is 0. Negative 4 is perfect. That one's okay. All right. I'm going to skip B just because the denominator is just x minus 3, so there's not really anything different there. C definitely gets harder. Sometimes you can't see what the common denominator is unless you factor first. So I'm going to take the y squared plus 2y, and I'm going to factor, and I'm going to pull out a y, and I'm left with y plus 2. Now, once I factor it, I'm going to cancel it out because I no longer have it. So all I did was I wrote that fraction in that denominator in factored form. Now I can more easily see that my common denominator is going to be y and y plus 2. So every single term is going to be multiplied by y and y plus 2. Now remember, I'm not necessarily multiplying it because I'm going to cancel as much as I can before I do any multiplying. So on the left fraction, the y plus 2's cancel, and I'm just left with y times 4. The middle term was just 1. So that means anything that you multiply by 1 just leaves it as as itself. And the last fraction, the y and the y plus 2 both cancel, and so I'm just left with a negative 8. All right, so a lot of that, even though it looks so messy, it really canceled out. The only thing I have is y times y is y squared, y times 2 is 2y. I want to bring everything to one side when I have a quadratic so I can factor that. So I have y squared minus 2y minus 8. My factors are 4 and 2. It's going to be a negative 4 and a positive 2. And then my answers are 4 and negative 2. Now, check. And if I was to plug in negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Oh, doesn't work. So my only answer is actually 4. Okay. Let's see how the time goes. Let me try F is definitely the hardest one on here. E, you're just cross multiplying. It's just a fraction equal to a fraction, so you're allowed to cross multiply. So that one's not hard at all. Just remember when you cross multiply that you're going to distribute as well. The hardest one, though, on this page is probably F. So I have x plus 5, x plus 3. So those are definitely going to be one of the factors. Let me take this trinomial and factor it. So x squared plus 8x plus 15. What are the factors of 15 that also combine to give me positive 8 is positive 5 and positive 3. Oops, that's a 3. So now I can more easily see that my least common denominator is going to be an x plus 5 and an x plus 3. But that means everything is multiplied by x plus 5 and x plus 3. But we're going to cancel, so it won't be too bad, hopefully. Most of it won't be too bad. So the first term actually is probably the worst because the x plus 5s cancel, but you're still left with x plus 3, and that needs to be multiplied by x plus 1. The second term, the x plus 5 and the x plus 3s both cancel, and you're just left with the 18, so that's nice. And on the right, the x plus 3's cancel, but I am left with the 9 and the x plus 5. So the first term, I have to FOIL that. So x times x is x squared, x times 1 is 1x, 3 times x is 3x, 3 times 1 is 3. On the right, I'm distributing. So I get 9x plus 45. I'm going to combine these like terms, and I'll have x squared plus 4x plus 21. I have to bring everything to one side, so I'm going to subtract the 9x, and I'm going to subtract the 45. And that gives me x squared minus 5x minus 24. Okay, now I can finally factor to solve. A lot of work going on here. So the factors of 24 that also combine to give me negative 5 are negative 8 and positive 3. I set each factor equal to 0, and my answers are 8 and negative 3. Now, 8 works fine if I plugged it into each one. Negative 3 does not work because look, negative 3 plus 3 is 0, so this one does not work. Okay, So I think that's enough. We'll definitely practice these tomorrow. So remember to solve. If you have a fraction equal to a fraction like e, you're just cross multiplying. That's the easiest one probably. But if you have more than just a fraction equal to a fraction, you find that least common denominator. Sometimes that involves factoring, like it did on F. Okay, so we'll practice those all tomorrow.